Namaskaram. Let's begin today's session with 3 chants of Aum. We'll keep in mind all the things that we discussed yesterday related to chanting of Aum. Satyanarayan Narayan Aum. Satyanarayan Narayan Narayan Aum. Narayan 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 Aum. Satyanarayan Narayan Narayan Aum. Namaskaram. இன்னைக்கு ஸ்ராவண சனிவாரா, அதாவது ஸ்ராவணான்றது ஒரு மந்த்து, லூனார் மந்த்து. அந்த மந்தில் 4 or 5 சாட்டர்டேஸ் வரும். ஸோ அதில் இது கடைசி ஸ்ராவண சனிவாரா, அதனால் பெருமாளுக்கு ரொம்ப சிரேஷ்டமானது. போன சனிக்கிழமை, அதுக்கு முன்னால் சனிக்கிழமைலாம் நம்ம சத்யநாராயண பூஜை பண்ணியிருக்கிறோம். அந்த அருள் இருந்துருக்குது. இன்றைக்கி இந்த பஜனைனால் அந்த நாராயணரை நினச்சிக்கலாம். இன்றைக்கும் ஒரு கதையோட இந்த செஷன் ஆரம்பிக்கலாம். இது இன்றைக்கி நம்ம பேசக்கூடிய என்ன விஷயங்க இருக்குதோ அதுக்கு ரொம்ப முக்கியமான ஒரு கதை. அது உங்களுக்கு எல்லாருக்குமே தெரிஞ்சிருக்கும். ஏன்னாக்கா இது ரொம்ப ஆல்மோஸ்ட் ஆல் இண்டியன்ஸ்க்கு தெரிஞ்ச கதை, என்ஆர்ஐஸ் பசங்க எல்லாருக்குமே தெரிஞ்ச கதை இது. நாரதர் ஒரு தடவை சிவனுக்கும் பார்வதிக்கும் கைலாய மலையில் உக்காந்துட்டு இருக்கும்போது ஞானப்பழம் எடுத்துன்னு வந்து கொடுக்குறாரு, ஃப்ரூட் ஆஃப் விஸ்டம். அது வந்துட்டு ஒரே ஒரு பழம் இருக்கிறதுனால சிவா பார்வதி ஒருத்தர் பார்த்துக்கிறாங்க. ஏன்னாக்கா 2 குழந்தைங்க அவங்களுக்கு, விநாயகர் முருகர். யாருக்கு கொடுக்குறதுன்ட்டு இது இல்லை. சரி, அதுக்கு ஒரு காம்படிஷன் வைக்கலான்னு சொல்லிட்டு யார் உலகத்தை முதல்ல சுற்றின்னு வந்துடுறீங்களோ அவங்களுக்கு இந்த பழம்னு சொல்லி காம்படிஷன் வைக்கிறாங்க. அதுக்கு தகுந்த மாதிரி உடனே முருகர் கேரண்டி இது நான் தான் வின் பண்ணிட்டு போகிறேன். ஏன்னாக்கா விநாயகருடைய வெஹிக்கல் வந்துட்டு மவுஸ், அதில் போயிட்டு வரணுன்னாக்கா வர இல்லையோ வாபஸ் தெரியாது, நான் மயிலில் ஈஸியாக போயிட்டு வந்துடலான்னு சொல்லிட்டு மயில் எடுத்துக்கின்னு ஆரம்பிச்சிடுறாரு உலகம் சுற்றின்னு வர்றதுக்கு. மயிலால் கூட சுற்றின்னு வரணுன்னா ரொம்ப ரொம்ப பெரிய விஷயந்தான். ஏன்னாக்கா அவ்வளோ பெரிய உலகத்தை சுற்றின்னு வரணுன்னாக்கா அது ரொம்ப நாள் ஆகுது அது சுற்றின்னு வர்றதுக்கு. அதுக்குள்ளே விநாயகர் யோசனை பண்ணி பார்க்குறாரு. அவர் புத்தியில் யோசனை பண்ணிவிட்டு அவங்க அம்மா அப்பாவையே சுற்றிட்டு வந்துட்டு பழம் கேட்குறாரு. ஏன்னா நீ போயிட்டே வரலையே உலகத்தைன்னாக்கா, என்னை பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் அம்மா அப்பா தான் உலகம். 3 வாட்டி சொன்னீங்க, சுற்றிட்டு வந்துட்டேன், இப்போ கொடுங்க எனக்கு பழம். அவங்களுக்கு சரியாக தோண்டு கொடுத்துட்றாங்க. நல்லா உட்காந்து சாப்பிட்டுன்னு இருக்கிறாரு. அப்புறமா முருகர் ஃபுல்லு டூர் அடிச்சுட்டு அவ்வளோ நாள் பொறுத்து வாபஸ் வராரு. வந்து பார்த்தாக்கா இவர் ஆல்ரெடி முக்கால்வாசி முடிச்சுட்டு லாஸ்ட்டு நக்கின்னு இருக்கிறாரு தும்பிக்கையில். அப்போது ரொம்ப கோவம் வந்துட்டு பழனி மலையில் போய் நின்றுக்கிறாரு. இதுதான் பழனி உருவான ஒரு கதை. இது நிறைய விதத்தில் நம்ம இதுடைய அர்த்தங்களோ சரி இல்லை ஒரு மாரல் ஸ்டோரியாவோ சரி எடுத்துக்கிறதுக்கு இன்னும் வாய்ப்புங்க இருக்குது. சிம்பிள் வே நிறைய பேர் எடுத்துக்கிறது வந்துட்டு பேரண்ட்ஸ் தான் ரொம்ப முக்கியம், பேரண்ட்ஸை ரொம்ப மதிக்கணும் அந்த மாதிரி. அதை ஓவராக எடுத்துக்கின்னு சில பேரண்ட்ஸ் அட்வான்டேஜ் எடுத்துக்கின்னு தன் குழந்தைங்கள ஆல்மோஸ்ட் அடிமைங்க மாதிரி வச்சுக்கிறதுக்கு ஒபீடியண்ட்டாக இருக்கணும், இது பண்ணோன்னு ஓவராக அவங்களுக்கு செல்ஃப் இம்பார்ட்டன்ஸ் வர வச்சுக்கிறாங்க. அது கூடிய சீக்கிரம் பசங்க புத்தி வர புரிஞ்சிக்கின்னு இட் பேக் ஃபயர்ஸ். ஸோ நம்ம வந்துட்டு எதுவுமே இந்த எஸ்பெஷலி ஸ்பிரிச்சுவல் ரிலேட்டட் திங்ஸை வந்துட்டு ரொம்ப கீழ்த்தரமாக இது பண்ணிடக்கூடாது. இட்ஸ் குட் டு டேக் மாரல்ஸ் அவுட் ஆஃப் இட், நோ டவுட் அபவுட் இட், பட் தெர்ஸ் ஃபார் மோர் சிக்னிஃபிகன்ஸ் டு இட். அதோட ரொம்ப முக்கியமான விஷயங்கள்லாம் இருக்குது, இதில் அடங்கி இருக்குது. அதில் ஒரு முக்கியமான விஷயம் என்னன்னாக்கா, நம்ம எது ஒன்று தேடின்னு இருக்கிறோமோ அது அவ்வளோ தூரம் போய் தேட தேவையில்லை, இங்கே கிடைக்கும். எஸ்பெஷலி அதை ஞானப்பழமாக சொல்கிறாங்க. ஞானம்னா விஸ்டம், நாலேஜ். ஸோ அந்த நாலேஜ் விஸ்டம்ன்றது நம்மளுக்குள்ளவே அடங்கி இருக்குது. அதுக்கு வந்துட்டு நம்ம அவ்வளோ தூரம் போய் எல்லா இடத்துலையும் தேடிக்கின்னு தேடி பிடிச்சி தான் போடணுன்றது அவசியமே கிடையாது. அதை வந்துட்டு நம்ம சில டெக்னிக்ஸ் தெரிஞ்சுக்கிட்டு அதை உணர்ந்தோம்னாக்கா அப்போது நம்மளுக்கு தன்னால் தானா எப்படி ஈஸியாக கையில் ஒரு பழம் கடிச்சிடுதோ அந்த மாதிரி அவ்வளோ ஈஸியாக அந்த பழம் நம்மளுக்கு கடிச்சிடுதுன்றத உணர்த்துறதுக்காக. நிஜத்தில் பார்க்க போனாக்கா இதுங்கெல்லாம் ஒரு 2 இண்டிவிஜுவல்ஸ் கிடையாது. முருகான்றது ஒரு இண்டிவிஜுவலு, விநாயகர்ன்றது ஒரு இண்டிவிஜுவல் கிடையாது. எல்லாமே நம்ம தான். நம்ம எப்போ நம்ம மூலாதார சக்கரத்துலேருந்து ஆப்ரேட் பண்ணுறோமோ அப்போது நம்ம விநாயகருடைய ஆட்ரிபியூட்ஸை நம்ம வெளிப்படுத்துகிறோம். எப்போ நம்ம சுவாதிஷ்டான சக்கரம், அதாவது செகண்ட் சக்கரா ஜஸ்ட் பிலோ த நேவல், அதுலேருந்து எப்போ நம்ம ஆப்ரேட் பண்ணுறோமோ அப்போது நம்ம முருகர் மாதிரி பிஹேவ் பண்ண ஆரம்பிக்கிறோம். இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் நேவலுக்கு மேலே வருது மணிப்பூர சக்கரான்ட்டு. அதுலேருந்து எப்போ ஆப்ரேட் பண்ணுறோமோ நம்மளே தான் ஐயப்பாவாக மாறிடுறோம். விநாயகராக இருந்த நம்ம முருகராக மாறி, முருகராக இருந்த நம்ம ஐயப்பாவாக மாறிடுறோம். அதோடு இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் நம்ம அநாகத சக்கரத்துலேருந்து ஆப்ரேட் பண்ண ஆரம்பித்தோம். இதில் ஹைரார்கி கிடையாது. அதாவது விநாயகர் முருகரோட சிறந்ததோ இல்லை முருகர் விநாயகரோட சிறந்ததோ இதெல்லாம் கிடையாது. எல்லாமே they have their own place, and without one the other, just having the other 6 also will not make a holistic person. So எல்லாமே equally important. ஏன்னாக்கா விநாயகர் represents wisdom, அதே மாதிரி முருகர் represents that valor, courage. ஸோ வெறும் விஸ்டம் இருந்தால் பார்த்தாது, அதே மாதிரி வெறும் கரேஜ் இருந்தால் பார்த்தாது, புத்தியே இல்லாமல். ஸோ போத் ஹாவ் தேர் ஓன் ஈக்குவல் ரெலவென்ஸ். ஸோ தீஸ் ஆர் ஜஸ்ட் அவர் ஓன் attributes. When they reach perfection, how they will be. That our great rishis have imagined and created characters out of that. It's like creating a movie based on some real life story. So it's a story which is happening within us every day. Sometimes we have to use more of wisdom, sometimes we have to use more of courage. So depending on the task, so we decide which is to be used more. It's usually a combination of both, but you typically use, depending on the task, which has to be employed more than the other. So அந்த மாதிரி நம்ம டிசிஷன் பண்ணின்னு போகிறோம். அதே மாதிரி ஐயப்பான்றது தர்மம் பற்றி, அதாவது பீயிங் ரைச்சியஸ். ஸோ அந்த ரைச்சியஸ்னஸ்ஸை எடுத்துன்னு வருது தர்மசாஸ்தா ஐயப்பா. அதனால தான் ஐயப்பாக்கு இன்னொரு பேர் கூட தர்மசாஸ்தான்னு சொல்லிட்டு. ஏன் ஒரு மணிப்புர சக்கரான்னாக்கா அவர் பேர் கூட மணிகண்டான்னு சொல்லிட்டு, அவருடைய கண்டத்தில் மணியோட கடிச்சார். ஸோ இந்த 3 பேருமே பார்த்தீங்களா நம்ம என்ன சொல்கிறோம், இவங்கெல்லாம் சிவாவுடைய சன்ஸ். விநாயகர், முருகர், ஐயப்பா எல்லாமே 3 sons of சிவா. நெக்ஸ்ட் வந்துட்டு 2 daughters of சிவா வராங்க. அதாவது லக்ஷ்மி and her husband Narayana, Saraswati and her husband Brahma. So Lakshmi Narayananறது வந்துட்டு நம்மளுடைய ability to earn money, wealth, prosperity in various forms, அதை வந்துட்டு என்ன நம்ம கிரியேட் பண்ணியிருக்கிறோமோ அதை சஸ்டெயின் பண்ணிக்கக்கூடிய விஷயங்க. நம்ம when we are acting from that attitude, then we are employing our own Lakshmi Narayana Tattva. And if we do that so very well, almost perfectly, then we become one with Lakshmi Narayana. It's not like Lakshmi Narayana is separate somewhere and we are separate. because it's omnipresent entity, adnale angyo irukudhu, anga illentirudhu, it's not, I'm not saying that they are not there, they are only here. Then the very definition of omnipresence will go. Adavadhu ella edathiliyum nerinji irukkiradhu dhaan kadavulnirudhu omnipresent nu solrom. Omnipresent nu sollumbodhu naan anga illa inga mathram dhaan appdi sollilla. Anga irukkiradhe dhaan ingiyum irukudhu, inga irukkiradhe dhaan angiyum irukudhu. ஸோ அங்கே போய் தேடி எடுத்துன்னு வருது, முருகா மாதிரி உலகெல்லாம் சுற்றின்னு போய் எடுத்துன்னு வருது. இங்கே இருக்கிறத எடுத்துக்கிறது நம்ம விநாயகர் மாதிரி புத்தி உபயோகித்து இங்கே எடுத்துக்கிறது. ஸோ இட்ஸ் ஜஸ்ட் அ கொஸ்டின் ஆஃப் எஃபிஷியன்சி. Muruga also completed the task that was given to him. Vinayaka also completed the task which was given to him. But Vinayaka did it in a more efficient way, without spending much energy, without spending much time. He accomplished the same goal. So that same goal which is outside in a temple, in a pilgrimage place, or in our puja room, that same thing, or in our parents, that same thing is in us also. So we can access it directly here. Doesn't mean we should not access it there. We can access it there also whenever opportunity persists. But and for this we don't need to look for opportunity. We are always there with us. Because by definition we are always there means whatever is in us is also in us. So Ganesha is always with us. It's not just he is with us, but I am he. So we start deepening this whole practice. First looking at there and saying that is Ganesha, then saying that is inside me, that at the Muladhara Chakra, and then saying that I am that when I am operating in a wise way. Whenever I am operating in a wise way, I am Ganesha. Whenever I am operating in a courageous way, I am Muruga. When I am operating all according to the rules, dharma, righteousness, then being duty conscious, whatever is my duty, taking care of the family, or in my case teaching or whatever, if I am doing that properly, I am doing at my best, then I am acting as Ayyappa. So I am Ayyappa. Okay, so then when I am preserving the things that are created or which are given to me, such wonderful gifts, it could be knowledge, it could be whatever, the wealth, anything that I possess, family relationships, if I'm taking care of all of that well, then it's basically, and also probably generating more money out of it. Whatever investment I'm doing, I'm trying to generate more through various intelligent ways. I'm basically operating as Lakshmi Narayana. If I'm doing very creative activities or artistic activities related to music, it could be related to literature, it could be related to painting, communication, talking, convincing others, or being useful to others, all that we are basically operating from the Saraswati Brahma principle. And as we start doing it better and better, we become one with Saraswati Brahma. Saraswati Brahma is not separate, we are not separate. We become Saraswati and Brahma. Similarly, when we go and operate from our Agnya Chakra, this is called the Vishuddhi. We go further up to operate from the Agnya Chakra. Just because of language, and I'm sitting, I'm saying this is up. When I'm lying down or I'm doing Sirshasana, it will be exactly opposite. So here up and down doesn't mean one is superior to the other or inferior to the other. They're all equally important aspects that we should always remember. So now we finished the three sons of Shiva, the two daughters and sons-in-law of Shiva. Now we have come to the wife of Shiva, Parvati. Durga, Kali, whatever we say, is essentially perception. So that's why we say the third eye is here. Third eye is something as an intuitive eye. It doesn't mean it is physically there. It's essentially our pituitary gland, which is right behind this in the endocrine system, and a little behind that is the pineal gland. So this pineal gland especially is not highly operational for most people. And what it secretes is what in our texts, scriptures is called as Amruta. So this Amruta is essentially what is being secreted from the pineal gland, by which we, what Amruta means. Mruta means dead. Amruta means which cannot be dead. They are immortal, mortal and immortal. So எதுக்கு ஒன்று சாவே கிடையாதோ அது பேர் தான் அம்ருதான்னு சொல்கிறோம். அது நம்ம கதை மூலியமாக அமிர்தம் குடிக்கிறது, அமிர்தம் குடித்தாக்கா எப்பவுமே சாவில்லாத இருக்கலாம். in the udalukku vandittu it's a material thing, it's physical. We have discussed this with the table, etc. They have a beginning end, not only in space but also time. It will be born, it will die. This is created by a carpenter at some point of time, and this probably has a fairly long life. Some point or the other it will keep getting damaged and all over probably many generations. It also has some kind of a finite life, however long it might be. So that is essentially what we have to recognize, that whereas when we are operating from our inner principles, that is immortal. So real amruta, that when we are saying amruta is secreted, it essentially means that our recognition or identification with our body now changes to identification with the soul or atma. Because body is mortal, soul is immortal. இதுக்கு சாவு உள்ளது, இதுக்கு சாவு இல்லாதது. அதனால எப்பவுமே நம்ம உடல் நினச்சின்னு இருக்கிறவங்க, எப்போ நம்ம உடல் இல்லை, நம்ம இதெல்லாம கூட இல்லை, பட் நம்ம ஆத்மான்னு உணர்ந்துடுறோமோ அப்போதான் நம்ம ரியல் immortal. So that immortality is what we get through intuition. So these eyes are for seeing outside, whatever is outside, and especially it helps us with survival. As human beings or even as animals, we were all either predators or prey, and we were trying to avoid the other type, either being eaten up or to eat something, and therefore we needed this for our survival, and we still need it. We need it for various other purposes, but all of those things are to do external work. Once we recognize that alone is not sufficient. Just walking Ricky style alone is not sufficient. They need to be at home also to enjoy and to eat their food, everything. They have to come back. For that, similarly, we cannot always be in the outside world. Every now and then we have to go inside. We can't be awake all the time. We have to go to sleep for some time. What is happening when you're going to sleep? You're essentially getting restful. So that restfulness is what is generated. So similarly, we have to have a good balance between how much we go out and how much we go in. In is actually, even though we use the word go, it's actually right here. So there's no going, just like Ganesha. He didn't have to actually go anywhere. He was right there, he got it. Wherever he was, he got it. Of course, just for the story's sake, we say he went around the parents or whatever, but essentially he's in the same location where he was, and he got it. So that's essentially what we are saying. So this journey doesn't even take time. And this realization can happen instantaneously at some point of time. And how it typically happens is we have to utilize grace or blessings. And this grace or blessings is nothing but recognizing that what we are here. Because this grace or blessings, we say, comes from God or comes from parents or comes from elders or comes from a guru, a teacher. All that is also true, because at this level, they are also same as us. So their grace is same as our grace. So whatever grace or blessings we get from parents or gurus, we get from ourselves also, the real ourselves. But because we are thinking we are the body, obviously we can't bless ourselves the way a parent can bless or a guru can bless, because especially gurus, they have already realized that they are the self, and therefore they operate from that point of view, and therefore they are within us, and so they can easily bring about that grace. And how this grace operates, why is it so important, is the analogy is you can think of a really wonderful car, or let's say any machine that you have. If you don't put oil for that, even the shutters, Daddy used to put so much of grease to make the shutter movement smooth. Otherwise, very difficult to pull it down and push it up. What that does is lubrication. It is basically making things smooth. Same job, only without putting grease also, you can pull it and push it, but with lot of work, efficient. It's not efficient process, very inefficient. But the same thing, when you put grease, this oil or lubricant, it becomes very easy. Same in car also. It might be the best car in the world that you have, but if you're not putting proper lubricants, it will get damaged. The engine will get damaged because it's not rotating smoothly, so it will get damaged. So even though we have been given such a wonderful body, great mind, great intellect, ability to breathe right from birth to death, all of this, unless and until that lubrication is there, they will not function smoothly. Because what happens when you don't put grease for the shutters? Why is it so difficult? Because it is getting friction. So that friction is generated between the shutter and the frame. So because of, similarly in the case of the car engine, if it will try to rotate, but it is scratching with the other parts in the engine, and therefore it's consuming much more energy. It is getting, material is getting damaged. So many bad things happen out of that. So essentially, it's not that this lubricant or grease is so expensive. These are things that are available and you can very easily buy and put, compared to many other expensive things we buy. Similar way, this grace is actually omnipresent. The blessing is omnipresent. And it is available for free, in fact. See, if you look at it, the more deeper we go, things become free. And this is another very important thing. We have a myth that only if things are costly, they'll be great. Actually, the free things are much, much more important and essential. Let's take just one example of the air that we breathe. Without this air, we will not live. The oxygen is necessary. Even for a couple of minutes, if we stop breathing forcefully, we will die. Many people are murdered like that. So you're essentially seeing that air is free. And till some time back, even water was free. It is because of our way of handling things, cutting off trees and denuding the planet, we have not been able to, and also polluting the rivers, everything, we have made it necessary to buy water and purified water, drinking water. We spend so much money over water, but it was not like that all the time. We, out of our mistakes, we have made it like that. So the basic point is that those things which sustain our life are actually quite free. And once we go even deeper to the soul, it's absolutely free. And even how much ever damage we do to our external planet, this will always remain free, because this is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal. And that's always accessible to us. Omniscient, all-knowing. Science is scient, means to know. To omniscient means to know everything. We have all the knowledge. We have all the wisdom. So it's not that it's for the external things about something I need to learn about carpentry, I need to learn from a carpenter. Or to learn about water pipes, I have to learn from a plumber. But here, it is, the knowledge is within us. But we are not operating from that. Therefore, we need to go to a guru who is operating from that. And therefore, we learn. And once we learn, we start operating from that level. And therefore, we operate out of our own grace. So it's only in the initial stages we need that exposure, because we are so used to that roles that we are playing. For example, there was this Tamil actor Murli, I don't know if you remember, used to play a college student all the time in his many of his movies, even when he was his 40s or 50s before he died at fairly young age. So he got what we call as typecast. Whenever we say Murli is a college student, even though he's 40 or 50 years old. Similarly, Manoj Kumar was a great Hindi actor, always acting in patriotic movies. So think he's the greatest patriot ever. So essentially, we are becoming identified and typecast like that. So we are not recognizing our true worth. We are much beyond that. Yes, we have those abilities, those tools, those faculties which we can use as and when we want, but we have to recognize that this is what we are. And once we recognize that this is what we are, there's absolutely no difference between God and us, between Guru and us, or any other person and us, because by definition, this is omnipresent. And omniscient, you asked. Yeah. Similarly, I'm sure you know the other things. Omnipotent means all the strengths, all the powers are there within it. And eternal means it is having no birth, no death. It's so just like omnipresent means it doesn't have a beginning or end in space. Eternal means it doesn't have a beginning or end in time. So both in space and time, it doesn't have a beginning or end. It is there everywhere and at all times. It knows everything and it has all the powers. That is even if one of that is not true, you don't call that thing as God. And because God is everything, everything has that. It's just that it is lying in a latent form. We say when, for example, in steam, there is so much of energy. And when we condense that, it becomes water, it gives up so much heat. And that same water, when we put it in the freezer and make it into ice, it can it gives out more energy. It becomes like that. So in other words, that steam had so much of latent energy, hidden energy. It just didn't know. Only when it is condensed, it got to know, and it got further solidified, and it became the ice. And so even more energy was released. So all that energy that we have is actually infinite energy, which is why we call it omnipotent. Similarly, knowledge also sometimes we share with our children, we share with our friends, we share knowledge about various things. Although it seems limited, but why? Because we are operating usually from this intellectual level. Yes, that is quite powerful, but there's something more powerful and even more powerful than that, which is infinitely powerful. Whereas all these are finitely powerful. These are all finitely having finite knowledge. They are having a beginning and end in space, beginning and end in time. Just that, of course, compared to the body, this is bigger in space and time. This is even bigger. Intellect is even bigger in space and time. And life breath is even bigger in space and time. But this is the ultimate, because there is no comparison to it. With infinity, nothing can compare. And that is what we are. And this should not remain just knowledge of intellectual level that we understand. Yes, yes. We have to operate like that. To be able to operate like that only, we have all these techniques, which we'll start learning very shortly. Those techniques that we learn will slowly make us recognize our foolishness, our silliness in basically agreeing with all these things as our identity. Yes, because in the outer world, when we are operating, let's say you as a wife or as a mother, you have to operate from your body and from your mind and all these things. So you do take upon these identities at times, but always remembering that it is a temporary identity. When Murli is playing a role in his movie, he should know that he is temporarily a college student. Manoj Kumar is playing a role in his movie, he should remember that he is temporarily acting as a patriot. He might be really also patriotic, that doesn't matter, but essentially that role as a soldier or freedom fighter or whatever, that is only restricted to between the beginning and end of that shooting of that movie. Once the shooting is completed, even others might be watching the movie, but still he is back to who he is as an actor, not as a soldier or as a freedom fighter. Already the freedom is got. So essentially that is one important thing, identity. And that identity only we call as ahamkara. Ahankara. Ninge tumba ahankara ide, we have started saying in a romba ahankaram irukuduma, you think it is ego. Unfortunately, it has been translated in that way. Ego is just a fall guy. Anything bad we do, we blame it on our ego. Anything good we do, we think we only did it. So this has to go. We have to take full responsibility for whatever we do, because we are the ones who are operating. Because we have assumed this, we are doing certain bad things, doesn't mean we are absolved of the responsibility. So we have the responsibility, and we can't just keep blaming that. That's why the beautiful word instead of ego in our scripture is, we call it as ahamkara. What is ahamkara? Aham is self. Kara is to give it a form. Kara, aham kara, means aham actually doesn't have any form. It is formless, because it's everything, everywhere, at all times. It doesn't have any particular form of its own. We out of our love and devotion, we give it a form with an elephant face, call it Ganesha, with a monkey face, we call it Hanuman, we call it whatever we want, but essentially that thing is actually in a formless state. But once we start taking these identities, either to act as a wife or to act as a, it might sound kind of too harsh to say acting as a wife, but what is meant is that this movie is lasting from the day of your marriage till the day of any one of the spouses dies. So essentially it is it's just that it's a longer movie. It's not a movie in the sense of a 2 or 3 hour movie. In that sense, it is not temporary, but it is still something which has a beginning and end. So that recognition has to come, that yes, we want it to be as long as possible. We want this married life and everything to be as long as possible, but we are beyond that. Once a husband dies, it's just that our life continues. During that period, we take care of him as if he was myself, and you love him, and whatever his righteous requirements might be, fulfilling that and all that as your own duty. To some extent, many times you don't even consider the person as different from you. That is the whole purpose of this exercise of marriage, is to understand that eventually that we are one with the entire world. At least we have to be one with one person. If we can't even do that, how to recognize that we are one with the entire world? So that recognition to come, these are all actually practical schools for us. And these schools are for much longer duration than the usual schools that we go to, almost a lifetime for most of us. So that's essentially what we are talking. One is the identity. When we take that identity of a wife or a mother, that is, we are acting out of ahamkara, doesn't mean ego. It is just that I am really aham, a formless, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal entity. But time being, for this life, for a few, let's say 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, I am assuming a role of a mother or as a wife or both, and I am doing that role to the best of my abilities. I want to win an Oscar award for this. I am doing as well as this. Many of the people, many of the best actors you see, when they are shooting at that duration, they are that character. They just imbibe that into it, and they're doing it. And that's the spirit with which we have to fulfill all our responsibilities. But we should never ever forget that this is our true nature. Because once we forget that, we start operating from a limited fashion, and even our duty as a wife, as a mother, starts becoming less. And we say, I can do only up to this, I cannot do that much. But we can extend how much we were capable of doing as a mother, how much you're capable of doing as a wife. This can be extended much more when you recognize that really this is what I am, but I am doing this role right now, so I want to do it as fully as possible. But I am not suffering from these limitations, because this is what I really am, and I can operate out of that even in these roles. So that is the realization or recognition we have to bring. So one is this wrong identification, because of which most of the problems come. The second is because these are not operating as a team. The mind is pulling in one way because you love something, you want to do it. The intellect is saying, no, that's not the right thing to do. It's trying to pull it in a different way. The body is having its own likings. For example, the intellect might say, you have to work so much so that you can be more productive. But the body will say, no, I am tired. I want to go sleep, take rest. So essentially, these are not operating in synchrony with each other. They have to operate as a team, because all of them are equally important. Just like in this hierarchy, as I was telling you, just because one is above the other doesn't mean one is more important than the other. But essentially, all of these have to operate as a team, and at different times we have to operate more from one center than the other. Similarly, we have to, in certain cases, operate more as a body than as a mind or intellect. Sometimes our intellect might take predominance, so sometimes mind might take predominance, sometimes the breath might take predominance. So all these things will operate as a team. Even within the body itself, you look at it, the various systems that we are made out of, the digestive system, excretory system, circulatory system, the nervous system, etc., skeletal system, all these have to operate as a team. If one starts fighting with the other, goes in different directions, the body is going to go through lots of diseases. It can even be fatal. So essentially, that cooperation between various parts is required, and once we recognize some parts are not working properly, they have to be handled in a particular way. And that's essentially what happens in our body system also. Those cells which are working against us, against our health, can actually be destroyed by the active cells in our immune system. To essentially, it's not just only things which are coming as an external intervention, like a virus which is coming or something with which we have to fight. Our own body cells, if they go bad and go beyond a certain point, that's what we call as cancer or whatever, right? So essentially, we have an inbuilt system of handling these issues within us to take care of. So sometimes the mind can be misbehaved, just like a misbehaved naughty child. So we have to bring it to its path and say, no, you're going beyond your what you are allowed to do. You are respected as a family member over here, but you have your not only rights but also your duties. So be within those bounds. You have the freedom, but be within those bounds. So that's essentially talking between each of these and making sure that this team works. So in that sense, yes, there is a hierarchy. Hierarchy in the sense of leadership. Leadership in the sense of enabling their own powers much better. So the body, first of all, should make sure that the sense organs and the organs of action that we discussed, 5 of each, 5 sense organs, 5 organs of action, all of them should listen to the body. They cannot operate on their own and keep doing. You see, some people have some medical condition where their hands will always be shaking or shivering. It's just that their organ of action, what we call as a jnanendriya, one of the organs of action, is not listening to their body. Similarly, the eyes or ears or whatever, they're always tending to go towards certain sense objects. So yes, that is their job. They have to do it. But if they do it beyond the necessity, beyond what is allowed, for example, watching screen time more and more and more and more, you are essentially creating trouble for your own health, right? So similarly, or listening to, let's say, putting on the headphone, listening to loud music for a very long period of time, you're going to go deaf soon, or at least your hearing abilities are going to come down. So same thing, we should utilize our intellect in order to tell our mind, even though you might like it so much, this particular music or this particular whatever you're watching, binge watching. So you do it within limits. Don't make it so much that it starts affecting the overall health. Similarly, the mind has to tell to the body has to tell to the sense organs. So in other words, there is a flow of how you actually want to take care of each other, but not out of a hierarchy. It is just out of knowing the roles of each other. So within the movie, different actors are there. One acts as a boss, one acts as an employee. Doesn't mean in the real life also that person who is acting as the employee is inferior to the person who is acting as a boss. It's during this movie, all of these have their own roles, and sometimes one takes precedence over the other, and some other time something takes precedence over the other. But whenever there is a conflict, this hierarchy should be removed. If there is a conflict, the intellect says something and the emotions say something, the intellect has to be listened to because it has a reasoning capability. It has an ability to think over, just not going by emotions alone. So it has to bring the mind back from going too far away. So there is a limit up to which you can see in your fingers also, you can stretch up to a particular limit. If you try to stretch beyond that, your webs of the fingers are going to tear. So essentially you are causing trouble to the whole system as a whole. So that's essentially what we have to do. One is in terms of the wrong identifications and coming back to the right identification every now and then, bring it back. Okay, while operating in the real life, in the outer world, in the material world, with families, with professions, etc., we have to take on this ahamkara. That means giving the aham a kara, which means a form. We keep giving a form, but always knowing that this is a temporary form and our real nature is this. So then we get so much strength, we get so much knowledge, we get so much of... see, the main reason why people are scared is because of the temporary nature of life, death, either for ourselves or for our family members or whatever. We are recognizing that it's a limited period of time. But that's because just like we identify with our own bodies, we are identifying our family members also with their bodies. We are thinking their body is them. No, their body is a tool given to them, but they are also this, which means they are us and we are they. So there's no way somebody dies, they go away forever, because their real form is formless, and that is with us. temporary form they had taken, yes, they have given that up, they take another temporary form, whatever. But their real nature is there everywhere, and our real nature is also there everywhere, and we are all one in that sense. There's not yourself, myself, as we talked earlier. There's only one self, which is ourself, which is the God, which is Brahman, Guru, whatever you want to give it a name, that doesn't matter. Essentially, it is the principle which is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and eternal. So the whole idea behind today's session is to deepen that understanding of what we are, what the goal is, which direction we are going, why we are going in the opposite direction. All these things we had seen earlier also. Now, in today's class, what we tried to understand was how to not go on that reverse gear, because that reverse gear is always taking us outwards, 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 because that is the design nature of all of these things. Now, how to bring it back? There is a payoff by bringing it back. By operating from this, we are operating in a temporary form, in a less powerful form with very little knowledge. We are operating out of that. But yes, we don't have a choice. We have to operate out of that. But if we keep reminding ourselves that this is what we are, it's like a huge bank account that we have, and we can withdraw as much as we want for depending on the tasks that we are doing. Some tasks might require more money to be withdrawn from the bank. Some tasks might want you to withdraw. How much ever you withdraw, this is not going to reduce. That much balance you have. That is what we have to recognize, that inner strength that we have, so much strength that we have, so much of resources, all kinds of resources that we have, none of which will get over. What we call as an akshaya patra or a kalpa vriksha, we call it a tree which is a wish-fulfilling tree, or we call kamadhenu, which is a wish-fulfilling cow. All these are beautiful stories in our literature, but we just tend to think of it actual cow or an actual tree. Then we are not utilizing the full power of that. Yes, even then there is some small benefit coming out of it. But once we recognize that we are the kalpavriksha, we are the kamadhenu, we are the wish-fulfilling tree and cow, which can fulfill any kinds of wishes of not only our body, mind, our intellect, our life breath, but others around us also, their bodies, their minds, their intellects, their life breaths. All of that we can take care of in the most efficient manner, like how Muruga went all around. We don't need to do that. That's also one way of doing it. If somebody asks us to touch the nose, I can either touch like this, like Ganesha, or I can go like Muruga and try to touch it. Both are correct only. There's neither one of them is wrong. But just that one is much easier and simpler way of doing things, and that we can accomplish by recognizing our true strength, that all that strength that we want. Yes, we are going to do all these sadhana practices, everything to deepen this, but right now, here and now, I recognize that this is what I am. At least at an intellectual level, I am satisfied, I'm convinced that this is what I really am, and that knowledge alone is so empowering. It makes us so much more powerful and better to handle all kinds of situations that we face, either externally or internally, in a much, much more efficient way, much, much more productive way, much, much more loving way, compassionate way, in a sense that we enjoy doing that and others enjoy doing that. Therefore, fulfilling what you said very rightly in the beginning, what our goal is, happiness. So that happiness is already there, just that we are blind to it and saying, where the happiness, I don't have a happiness. So it's like just closing our eyes. Just open up and see. It's there right in front of you, or more rather within you. Because this eye cannot see it, we have to open up that. And that's essentially Durga or Kali or Parvati, as we say. This is a wife of Shiva, and eventually we come to Shiva at the Sahasrara Chakra, which is essentially opening up to our nothingness, in the sense that all this is an illusion. This whole body, mind, intellect business is an illusion, in the sense that it's all temporary. Even though it might be 100 years, 120 years, still it is finite. It is not eternal. So opening up to that total knowledge is what happens there. And then, in fact, many people don't realize there's another chakra beyond that Shiva Tattva also, what we call call as the Matru or Pitru Tattva, which is essentially all our parents, whether they are living or not, with our ancestors, essentially who are still operating through our DNA and who are in our system, and the knowledge and wisdom that they have gained, everything is contained within that system, which is about a few inches above the head. And then a little above that is what we call as the Guru Tattva or the Gayatri Tattva, which is essentially the doorway or pathway to whatever we need to achieve, which is essentially the identification with this, all the attributes of which we already discussed. So I hope this is clear. Okay. So the mind is essentially made out of emotions, right? The intellect is essentially, though we always, when we say intellect, we point to the brain, that is not the only place where it is. It is there in every cell of our body, acting in the form of memory and imagination. All these things are contained within that. But essentially, it is the ability to dissect things and look at it from the parts and then put it back. So that is essentially what the intellect does. So the mind, what it is made out of, let us see. So the intellect we understood. What is it made out of? Because we have, for it to function in a particular way and to do its task of control, so-called controlling the mind, it has to do certain tasks. So we have to understand first what it is. So this intellect is, as I said, it is not just in the brain, but it is in every cell. It's essentially our intelligence. And in fact, it is the intelligence of the entire universe, a part of which we have borrowed. Like just like in the balloon example I gave, a part of the air that is all around, we have borrowed into that portion. Now, similarly, what is the mind made out of? This is something very many people are surprised or shocked about, that the mind has no existence of its own. It is the thoughts, it is the emotions which make up the mind. So once you reduce your thoughts or emotions, you reach a state of what is known as a no mind. So the way the intellect helps the mind, because controlling is too harsh a word, sometimes I also use it, but essentially what you're trying to do in that is to tell the mind what it really is. To put it in its place, sometimes we have to tell the truth. So sometimes, because somebody is bossing up too much, we have to tell him, well, friend, you are also hired. You have to be behaving according to the rules of this company or wherever you're working. So essentially, that understanding has to be given to the mind that it is just a conglomeration of thoughts. And by going into meditation, you are actually trying to get into a state where there are less and less thoughts and eventually no thought, to recognize that actually there is no mind at all. That state to be reached, it has to be a cooperation of everything, but the mind is not willing to allow for this to happen. That's where the intellect comes and starts convincing the mind of what are the benefits of doing that through intellectual reasoning. See, if you do this, then this is happening. If you do that, that is happening. What is all these things? Let's say, if you list out all the problems which people generally face, it's like fear, restlessness, anxiety, anger, hatred, jealousy, all kinds of things. But all of these, whatever it is essentially a collection of thoughts. And that collection of thoughts, once it ceases, that feeling or that particular way of expressing the energy also ceases. And doing any one of these things is actually doing more harm to ourselves than to anybody else. And by doing so much of harm to ourselves, it is a very stupid way of living. And that the mind by itself is not able to think, because it is not a thinking faculty. It is a emotional faculty. It is just going by the thoughts, just the flow of whatever is happening is just going by the flow of that. So now what you're trying to do is to rein in the mind by using the intellect to convince, give it reasoning. What happens when you get fear? Actually, what happens when you get fear? The fear is always about something that is unknown. It could be about something which is going to happen in the future, or it is going to, let's say, some imagination that we have done. So it's essentially a thing which may come into existence, may not come into existence. We don't know for certainty it will happen. it's not that we shouldn't be prepared for any eventuality. We should be prepared for all eventualities. But by being scared, you're only expressing the fact that you are, whatever the unknown is, you are assuming it at a certain level of certainty. There is a way to, first of all, avoid that. And even if that happens, there's a way of overcoming that. So this power we have because we are operating from this. The intellect knows better because it is closer to this, and where compared to this. And this is, of course, closer than this, and this is closer than the sense organs. So each one of them, being closer to this, have the better knowledge and understanding of what we really are, and therefore intimately can convince. Say if our usually in a administrative setup or something like that, there will be a chief minister, there could be, let's say, the council of ministers, then the secretaries, etc., etc. Instead of directly the chief minister coming and telling, let's say, a peon or somebody, this is wrong, or he'll get totally nervous and scared because such a big person is coming and telling me. But let's say the clerk, who is probably next level to the peon, if he comes and tells, they are at least kind of maybe not buddies, but at least they have some kind of a rapport. They have been interacting all the time. It's not once in a while, like how he sees the chief minister once in a while. So when that person tells him, it becomes a little more easy to understand and to see, okay, maybe I can try that out. So immediately next to the mind, who is closer to the actual reality, is the intellect. So the mind, usually, if the intellect does it reasonably good job, then the mind will start listening to the intellect. So every time, and this sometimes, yes, there will be conflicts, but by practice, when you keep on making this known to the mind, that see, certain things you're not certain about. Why are you scared about that? Or certain things you get angry about. More than the person whom you're getting angry against, it is yourself whom you're injuring, because the kind of chemicals which are generated within the body are going to harm the health of the body also, and the psychological state also. So all of that the mind will not understand by itself. The intellect's role or job is to go and convince the mind, because it knows all these things. It has that reasoning capability. It can go and tell them, and that will get convinced. It may not get convinced the first time. You need to keep telling that and persist with that. And sometime down the line, it will happen. So, but and over time, this keeps getting energized from the life breath, and the life breath keeps getting energized from the soul, etc. And so there's a flow. So this will never get tired of convincing the mind. Just that you have to put it to its use, and slowly you train the mind to listen. So main important thing is, first of all, we should not get identified with any of that. Then the intellect will have a very tough job. If you are identified with your mind, you think you are the mind, then the intellect can never come and do any changes in the mind. Even though it's supposed to be a more powerful position, closer to the soul, it is not able to handle this, because you are thinking that this is you, and therefore you have pumped in more and more power to that, and therefore that starts bossing around this. So that's what typically happens with most people. The control gets topsy-turvy, and therefore all these problems. We can give it all these names, either in our day-to-day life, we call it anger, hatred, jealousy, etc., fear, etc., or in a psychiatric, they might give even more high-funda names to all these things and call it all kinds of diseases and all that. But essentially, in the actual happening, if you see, this is all that is happening. That we have got identified with one of these, and therefore the flow of instructions is not happening in the proper way, and therefore everything is getting messed up, and these are trying to move in different directions, pulling apart. The webs are going to get cut. So that's essentially what we have to keep on. This happens only through abhyasa, what we call as practice, and vairagya, detachment from each one of them, not getting fully identified with that. Yes, to do certain tasks, you get identified with that task. Once that task is completed, you go back and recognize your deeper self. And so each time you come back and do that, these will also get more and more power to operate in the right way. They will not only keep asking for their rights, they will also start doing their duties. Once they all start doing their duties, it's like a very good office where everybody is doing their own job properly. There's no problem happening. It's only when somebody is not doing their job and somebody else is getting upset because that person is not doing the job properly. I have to do his job also. Sometimes the intellect has to do the job of the mind, or the mind has to do the job of, then all these problems happens. Very clearly recognizing whenever something related to emotions has to be done, it has to be the mind which has to do it. Anything related to the intellectual reasoning, etc., the intellect has to do it. And when there is a conflict, this has to get the upper hand over this. And most of the time, we should see to it that they're not getting into conflict. What is that conflict? Already we discussed in a different language, friction. So that conflict is friction. How to handle friction? Grease or oil. How even lock is not operating properly, we put oil. What is that? That is essentially the blessings or grace of the soul, which if we are not already operating from that, we can borrow it from, because this same soul is in the guru, it's in the parent, it is in the elders who we might respect or trust, it's in the guru. And so we can borrow it from them. And again, Purnamada Purnamidam operates that how much ever we take out of them blessings, how much ever grace we take out of them, their grace or blessings remains infinite. So it's just a bank with unlimited balance, and how much ever you take from it doesn't matter. So that, and use that grease to avoid these conflicts, which is essentially friction between that and their tendencies to go apart. This is omnipotent and omniscient. That means it has unlimited knowledge, unlimited power. So that's essentially needed. That power and knowledge are needed for all of these to operate, not only in the interior world, but in the external world also. How much we borrow from that depends on how well these can operate. Because the more the resources we have, the better the capability. But of course, having a lot of resources also, many people waste it and squander it and use it in probably bad habits and things like that. That is a different thing. But do we have access to the resources? We have. But that resource already within us. But we have not yet opened up to receive that resource from ourselves. So until that point of time, we can get it from a Murti of Sai Baba, or because why? Because other great people have induced their soul energy into it, and I can't even tell their soul energy. It's there's nothing like our soul energy, their soul energy is only one soul energy. But they have access to it, we don't have access to it. It is that infinite balance bank account, all of us have access to it. Some of us, like Papaji, towards the end of his life, he forgot to put his signature. We have forgotten to put our signature, so the bank manager is not releasing the funds for us. It belongs to us also. But Sadhguru knows that signature, he is putting that signature and drawing as much as he wants. Ravi Shankar, Guruji, or whoever it is, great people, Amritanandamayi, Shivananda Swami, Chidananda Swami, Swami Sarvananda, all of them are able to know what is the authorized signature, and they are putting that authorized signature and getting their thing. And it's not that they're robbing us, because it's anyway infinite, because they are all, how much ever they take, it will still be infinite only. And when we are ready to take, we can take it from there. But until that time, when we have not practiced that signature properly to access this within ourselves, we can access it from them. They're willing, and this is the great thing that they are doing out of their compassion, let's say, and that comes naturally. It's not a made-up compassion, because once we start operating out of that, there's no way we cannot be compassionate, because you are not separate from me. Whatever I do for myself, I will do for you, because you are me. So why will I say no, I will not do it? It's not that will she become greater than me, will she become richer than me, will she become more knowledgeable than me? That point itself doesn't arise because you are me, and if you become that, yes, I am happy because I am also that only. So that identification with the reality, we have understood from an intellectual perspective. We have not understood it from the experiential perspective in terms of operating in a day-to-day life. It will start happening already. Once you listen to this and keep on thinking about it, you will start using it. But you'll get it in glimpses. Yeah. Sometimes you'll use it, let's say in 24 hours, you might use it for 1 minute or so. For the rest of 23 hours and for 59 minutes, you'll not use it. Next day, maybe you'll use it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It's essentially you're enhancing the operation from your true identity whenever and wherever possible. Whenever all these other things cooperate and try to say, okay, fine, we are all tools, you don't think that we are this, you operate from that. So that allowance has to be given more and more and more, and then we start accessing it right here. But we should not wait till then. Right now we have access through the murtis, through our parents, through our gurus, through our scriptures. It's already there. So till the point when we are trying to access this fully, instead of just glimpses now and then, because the goal is 24/7, 365 days or 366 days in a year, we have to operate from that. So that will happen eventually. Even if we are not trying towards that, for all of us, it will happen sometime or the other. If not in this lifetime, some future lifetime, it will happen. But the question of getting that to that stage, the earlier, the better. I can, if I want to reach California, I can take a flight and go, or I can go on a ship, which will probably take a few weeks or even months to reach. It's a question of how much of a hurry I am in to reach that stage. By reaching this stage, what you're doing is not only are you making your goal of happiness come about, but that happiness you are able to spread for everybody. How much happiness Sadhguru is spreading to so many people? Why is it possible? Because he's operating from that. If he had said, okay, anyway, it will happen to everybody, let me wait and I will not work towards that, neither would he be happy, nor would he have been able to spread that happiness to everybody else around him, whether it is to his family or to his disciples and everybody, the entire world. That possibility is there within each and every one of us. And it's not everybody that who starts operating from this becomes an actual guru and starts spreading and giving out this. They might just be living out of their own happiness. If somebody comes to them, then they share that happiness and give them as much happiness as they require or need or ask for. But they may not be outgoing to spread this. There are very few rare souls like Sadhguru, etc., who come out in the open. There's a beautiful Tamil saying, I forgot, but what joy we have experienced, let us share it with everybody else also. That kind of an attitude and going out of their way to spread this joy and this happiness that is coming out of such great souls, and we have to try and utilize that. And how much ever we utilize, they don't lose out anything, because they have that infinite balance we have talked about, right? So they always have it. And they are more than happy to give it. And in fact, the only concern is why, even though this is so useful and beneficial, why isn't everybody coming? That's one grouse Sadhguru expresses all the time. Because once he got this wisdom, awakening, he thought that within the next 2.5 years, he will spread it to this entire world, so these practices can be done by everybody, and everybody can come to a state that he is in. Today, about 1 billion people have been touched, but the population of the world has increased to 8 billion or so. So 7 billion have not got that knowledge. And even the 1 billion who have got that knowledge might have got it in a superficial sense, may not be actually implementing it in a day-to-day thing. Because once you learn this Shambhavi Mahamudra Kriya, what happens during that is called as an initiation, where transmission takes place. Because this is a person, Sadhguru, who is operating from that, and he can transmit. And this is the first time it's happening in an online fashion, because nothing is impossible for them. They are omnipotent. They are operating from that. but just that it has not been tried out in the past. Of course, he himself has already done it very successfully. Last December, there was an online Shambhavi initiation. But what I'm saying is that the main, in that also you'll, I think, have 2 sessions of first 2 sessions will be 2.5 hours each, and last will be about 8.5 hours each. Sadhguru will actually personally come for that last session, and he will do what is known as a transmission. You will see that he will be rubbing his hands, he'll be making kinds of sounds and other things. Without all these knowledge that I'm sharing right now, when you just see like that, purely from operating from your intellectual reasoning level, I think, what is this guy doing? Is very silly, making all kinds of sounds, shaking, and some people here and there are crying, yelling. They're basically letting out that wrong identities that they are holding, at least to some extent, if not fully, and that sometimes gets expressed in different ways for different people. But essentially, there's a lot that is in our hand that we don't recognize. And this particular way of describing things, that this is the body, this is the mind, I have not seen anybody else do it, including Sadhguru. This is something that, knowledge that during my meditations I have perceived. And therefore, I have recognized some parts and parcels of this are in the Vedas, and everything is the source is the Vedas. Whether it is the Shambhavi Mahamudra Kriya, which Sadhguru is teaching, or whether it is Sudarshan Kriya, which Guruji Ravi Shankar of Art of Living is teaching, or it is Paramahamsa Yogananda, who wrote the autobiography of a yogi, very famous in the West. He teaches Kriya Yoga. Then what Baba Ramdev is teaching, or what Swami Shivananda and others were teaching, every one of them, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or Chinmayananda of Chinmaya Mission, every one of them, it's the source is essentially in the Vedic knowledge. And don't think of Veda in the sense of we think Bible or Quran as books. These are sounds which have been heard from nature, and these sounds is essentially knowledge, and knowledge beyond the sounds that we hear. Our human ear is able to hear only frequencies between 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, what we call as 20 kilohertz, which means that the waves which are going will go 20 times in a second or 20,000 times in a second. Between that range we can hear. Any vibration which is going less than 20 times a second, but even though its volume might be so high, we cannot hear. But some animals like elephants and all can hear. What essentially it means is that they can hear an elephant which is like, say, 5 or 6 kilometers away. Any sound it is making, we cannot hear from here, but this elephant can hear from there. Because based on the needs we have, as we have evolved, we have shortened some of these capabilities. For example, an owl or a bat can see in the night. So that night vision capabilities we didn't need anymore. Maybe as a hunter-gatherer when we were, as evolving as human beings, maybe we needed to some extent. But over time we have not required, and therefore the light that we can see is just between violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, Vibji, or those colors only. But beyond violet there is ultraviolet and so many other things. So beyond red there is infrared and so many other things. All those we are not able to see. If you look at the entire electromagnetic spectrum, it runs for hundreds of kilometers. We are able to see just 1 meter of that. That's so tiny we are seeing, and in that so much of color, so much of variety, so much of shapes, so much of sizes, and out of that making movies out of it, photographs out of it, so beautiful. If that small thing is so beautiful, imagine what that real big thing is. And this is purely from science. We are saying what frequencies we can hear, what electromagnetic waves we can see. In that range itself, there is so much. And then we are not only going, we are going beyond this light energy, sound energy, to the original form of energy. That's really, really beautiful. And so there's so much within the hand. And that's why all these things like acupressure, we will not understand from an intellectual point of view. We try to understand also, it will seem silly and other things. But there's a huge amount of science in that. If you look at it from a modern science perspective, there's amazing truth in all of these things. But it's not necessary to try and understand from an intellectual point of view going into the science. If something works, why not? It worked for me. So it's out of that conviction that I'm saying it to you. See, any knowledge that you seek from anybody, the first test you have to do, eventually the guru tests the student, but even before the student accepts the guru, you should test the guru. So one thing is, okay, this person is saying so many things, has it worked for him? So if it has not worked for him and he's just coming and teaching, it's like a blind man leading another blind person, right? So once it has worked for me and then I'm teaching, you can hear that in the conviction of the voice itself, telling it out of so much of and you can't act this out. It really comes out, this knowledge, it flows because you have experienced it. And that's essentially what I'm talking about. So this is something that has not been talked, at least I have not seen it being talked about. It could be a knowledge which is already there everywhere, but just that people may not have talked about it. So there is so much of this identification of this with the earth element, the water element, the fire element, air element, and space-time. This is so very beautiful, and the way I actually recognized it is during many of these mudra dhyanas or mudra pranayamas that I've been doing. You can really feel those things as you deepen your practices. I'm sure you will feel it's not something that only I can do or only a Sadguru can do or only a few people in this world can do, because these are all very, very internalized things. You're using external things like a finger or a hand to generate that internal thing. The other thing is that the breath patterns, for example, are closely related to our emotions. You would have observed very clearly, if only you paid a little attention, when you are angry, how fast you breathe. And when you are very loving or peaceful, how slow and deep you breathe. So it's that emotion which is controlling the breath, but in reality, the hierarchy should be with the breath we can control the emotion. Because this is actually double promotion, going from here to here. And so by making our breath pattern consciously slow and deep and taking fewer breaths but longer, deeper breaths, each one of them, many of these negative emotions will automatically vanish. And this, again, another way of saying the same thing is through stories like Ramayana, etc. Though they happened historically 7,000 years back, it's happening in us every day. Hanuman is nothing but the breath. That's why we call him Vayuputra. He's the Putra of Vayu, air, wind god. And Sita is the mind. So it is this Hanuman, when Sita was kidnapped, she had to be brought back to the Atma. That was possible not directly, but through the breath. In other words, this hierarchy was very important in making this reunion possible. So all of these wonderful literature or stories or things like that we have got, all of them have very, very deep spiritual meaning. And many people are using it for this hand, for example. I'm sure you would have heard of acupressure or acupuncture and these things in the feet as well as the hands. Many of these points are connected to different parts of the body and they have a direct contact. And they might understand only up to the body point of view, but they have very deep connections to the mind as well, to the intellect as well, and eventually our true nature as well, which is the life, breath, and the soul. So, and as we reduce our identity with the body, start increasing identity with the mind, it's a step-by-step, gradually we can go, instead of directly jumping from here to here, which happens in a very, very few rare cases. That's probably because in the previous janmas, they have gone through so much of training, other things, that all of these are already done for them in the previous lifetimes, and they suddenly jump one fine day from this to this. So, but for most of us, it's a gradual process. Let's go from first standard to second standard, third standard, fourth standard, fifth standard. Let's go in step-by-step approach like that. And then we slowly start recognizing, as we distance from this, how much bigger we are, how much more powerful we are, how much more knowledgeable we are. We'll be surprised ourselves. Sometimes when I give these talks, not to you, but for the previous recordings and other things for Vasnima's channel, etc. Later on, I will be watching it on TV, what I gave, just to see how it has come out. And it's like, where did I get this knowledge from? How the hell did I speak all these things? Because it just comes with the flow. Because as you go in deeper and deeper into it, you're starting to identify less and less with the body and mind. When you're operating from the body, it's mostly out of your sense organs and your organs of action. So you're using for your activities the organs of action, whether it is to move around your legs or to do your work, your hands and the reproductive organs, excretory organs, the mouth, all these things you're essentially using for bodily requirements. So as and when it is required, if you use and don't overuse it, then slowly you start identifying more and more with the mind. That's what has happened with many of us. See, if you look at the kind of lifestyles we have today, with all the conveniences that we have, we don't need to do a lot of physical work. Even our own generation who go far away distance to pick up water, bring it, no geyser, so she has to heat it in the stove, and even the stove, it's not a gas stove, she has to blow and that smoke will come. So much of physical activity was required. So as you do more and more and more physical activity, those people were just identified more with the body. Now we have an opportunity when many of those, if not all, at least many of those tasks are taken care of. Even sweeping and swabbing our Snowy can do. We'll demonstrate it one day. So many things which we were doing physically with our hands, with our legs, there are machines to do that. So there's no better opportunity than today for us to move from body consciousness to mind consciousness, which is why we have started identifying with the mind and all the thoughts that are going with it. If the emotions that were going on there were cleaner emotions, like love or compassion and things like that, then awesome. But if it is getting identified with the fear, with the anger, all these kinds of things, then even though we have got a promotion, it's like in first standard I was doing very well, getting first rank all the time, getting 100 marks in everything. After I go to second standard, I am getting, let's say, failed in many of the subjects or very less marks, etc. It's like that. Yes, I've got a promotion, but I'm suffering there in that promoted state. But if we can cleanse that, and see how, and this cleansing again, we'll talk about it in detail later on, but the bath that I talked about, that bath doesn't only affect the body, it affects the emotions also quite a bit. And you will very, very clearly observe this. Let's say you're in a very angry mood, or let's say any one of the negative emotion mood, even scared or something, just take a nice shower in not very hot water. How much ever you can decrease the temperature, depending on the weather, of course, you cannot go to very cold water also, but as less the temperature as possible, closer to room temperature. I'm not saying going to freezing water or whatever, closer to the room temperature. If we take lukewarm kind of a water like that, then you will see that, because this whole thing, we call it body and mind, but reality it is a physical body and subtle body. So, in other words, we have what is known as a psychological body. And there are these days Schlieren cameras which can take photographs of you, which can show a certain color pattern around you. And if I take a photograph of you today and tomorrow, it will be quite different. And if I take of her and you just today, it could be very different from each other. So essentially, that is your psychological body. We can't see it with these eyes because these eyes are meant to see only physical things. This is essentially a subtle body that is there, a psychological body. Similarly, a slightly bigger than that. That balloons that I was talking about is not just an imaginary thing. It is in fact real. So just that those are not physical balloons. It is just a outreach. That's why something happens here. Sometimes you feel it. Sometimes, even though you have not turned around and seen it, sometimes you can feel something happening here because you're feeling it with your mind, rather than with your skin, not by touching it and feeling it, but just you can feel. And as we deepen our spiritual practices, what happens is that becomes bigger and bigger, because we eventually are moving towards being infinite, and there's nothing other than us. So all the interactions that are happening is only when we can be finite.
So essentially what we are doing when you are taking a bath is not only, if the shower is good enough, good flow, you are cleansing not only the physical body, you are cleansing the subtle body also. It's very difficult to cleanse all of these unless you're just deep diving into the ocean or something like that. Then you tend to cleanse even these. Many of these deep divers who go into getting these corals and other things, you'll see a lot of mystical way of thinking, the way they perceive things like that, because every now and then they get completely cleansed. Because the water element, I said, is dominating 72%. So that water element gets completely revamped when you're going through these kinds of things. So if you take a reasonably good shower, which is spreading not just to your shoulder to shoulder, but a little more, then you will see that when you come out of the shower, you will feel maybe that fear or anger is not completely gone, but you will see it as reduced. You'll be operating from a more loving, compassionate nature. So the cleansing happens in that way. That's why you see many of these yogis and all will be taking 5 baths or 6 baths in a day, because their body becomes so sensitive, especially at the mind level and other things, because their identity is slowly moving. It's in a transition stage. It's not that they have reached here, when of course you can handle everything once again. You're slowly going in this. While you're going, you have to, it's like that sapling I told, no, when the seed in the initial stage, you have to protect it with a veli and all, you have to do that. But later on, as you go, it becomes a strong tree. It can take care of itself. It's like our children also. In the beginning, infancy stage, we have to take care of everything that they did. Now we have to take care of fewer things. And once they grow into adults, they take care of everything themselves. Maybe someday they will even help us with whatever our requirements might be. So what essentially is happening is that you are trying to understand and practice from the actual deeper level that you are, which is actually a much bigger level. And in doing that, you go, as you asked, how to go from one step to other, essentially you are slowly reducing that activities of that level to the bare minimum what is required. What are the physical activities are actually necessary? We are most of the time doing unnecessary activities physically also. But today, because of the conveniences, we have an opportunity where we are mostly operating from the mind. But the kind of thoughts, emotions we are going through, some of them are really beautiful and lovely and have to be done. But most of them, 80-90% for most of us, it is just useless thoughts. It's thinking about something, imagining something may or may not happen in the future, or guilt about something that I may or may not have done in the past. All these kinds of nonsense is going on where we have no control. It's not even happening right now here. It's maybe it's happening now, but somewhere else where I can't even do anything about it. What's the point in worrying about it? Maybe can I call somebody there and see they can go and take care of that, whatever is happening there? That kind of a positive attitude of how to rectify the thing is good. Then the intellect is coming and telling the mind what to do, but you're entirely operating from the mind level. Then what happens is 80-90% of that is waste. Only 10-20% of that is good. Then what we have to slowly graduate. We can't keep failing in second standard all the time. We have to move. We can't be happy that just by circumstance I passed from first standard to second standard just because the conveniences grew. At least for most of us, there are still so many poor people who don't have many of these conveniences, and they still have to do a lot of physical work. It's not that those who do only physical work cannot succeed, because as I already told you, for each level there is a yoga also. This is called karma yoga. Without worrying about the fruits of action, you still just go on doing your duty. With this itself, direct promotion you get to here. But now that we have moved from here to here, we'll go in steps gradually. But here it is bhakti yoga. To take care of the mind, the best thing is devotion. It's total devotion to whatever little things you're doing, and eventually whatever the gods or gurus or like Sai Baba, Shirdi, these things, that whatever. And it's lovely that you're writing this Likit Japa and other things, extremely powerful. These things, the energy of that will slowly modify that one thing and reduce the number of useless thoughts retain only the useful emotions, and then you go to the next level, and at the intellectual level of reasoning out. And there also it's possible some of us, especially overeducated people, tend to too much intellectually analyze things. Everything we try to dissect, analyze, reason only. If it is only scientific, then I will accept. If it is not scientific, I will not accept, even though I might actually be experiencing it. So that kind of attitude is very similar to getting overly focused on the useless emotions of the mind. We can get overly involved with the useless reasoning of the intellect also. Intellect's, again, a very, very powerful, very useful tool to do a lot of scientific thinking, discover new things, etc. But if we tend to overuse it, again, we are in trouble. So at every stage, see, it's like I'm so attached to my second standard teacher. She is so beautiful. I don't want to go to third standard. I keep failing in my second standard only. It's like that. We are getting attached to the mind and remaining with the mind only. No, let's move on. It doesn't mean I'm killing this or something like that. That's still operating, but operating the minimum level, that whatever it is required. And then let me operate from a better level. The third standard is, I can learn more. So let me move to the third standard. That is the attitude with which we start going. And just because I just come to third standard, I should not feel so great that this is the only thing, only word. I should always be remembering that, yes, there is the ultimate that I have to reach. And of course, these can be made into many more multiple divisions and all that, but it's unnecessary nitpicking over that. This is enough, because this is something that we can actually relate to in our day-to-day life also. We recognize what is the physical body, what's the psychological body. This is more of anatomy. This is more of physiology, the breath patterns. This is more of the intellectual body. And this is the bliss body. A body which is blissful. And bliss is very different from happiness. See, happiness has an opposite, sadness, but bliss doesn't have an opposite at all. So bliss means that's the only state you be in always. So happiness, sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad, again you become happy. You go through these cycles. Pleasure and pain is also like that. Sometimes you find pleasure somewhere, sometimes there is pain. Hot and cold, something is hot, something is cold. You see, all of these things which have opposites are relative. In the sense that if I touch something and I feel this is cold, it's not necessarily this is cold. You might touch and feel this is hot because your body might be colder than mine. So you might feel that this is hot. So it's always in the relative sense of the temperature that we are feeling and concluding something is hot or cold. Similarly, pain and pleasure, happiness and sadness. What is happiness to somebody might look like sadness to somebody else. So same thing, all these things, dualities, we want to go beyond that to this state of blissfulness where there's no opposite at all. That's because there's only one. There's nothing other than one. It might sound too boring or whatever, but no, that is the ultimate. You will get a glimpse of that. You just don't want to return. But because we are embodied, as long as we are embodied, we continue to do that. But we do it in a very beautiful way. And spreading that bliss to others also. They may not experience it as bliss. They might experience it as pleasure or happiness. But we are giving more of that pleasure and happiness to others, our family members, our colleagues, or whoever we are dealing with in day-to-day life, whether people who are working with us or anybody. For all of them, we are essentially giving a better life than what we could while we are operating from these identities. So that's, and you will see this, it's not like only after all this is accomplished and I go to fifth standard, this is great. No. As you're moving from first standard to second standard, within second standard itself into, let's say, half-yearly exam, 3, 4, etc., you already experience that in your day-to-day life. You will see that difference of how much more happiness you are feeling, how much more of that happiness you are able to share with anybody and everybody, even if they're not physically present, even over a phone call or just a gesture that you do, whatever, a message that you send. Out of all of these things, you're actually spreading that energy, and that capability to spread energy will not be there unless you yourself have that energy. And until you reach there, it will not be infinite energy, but it will be much, much more the energy operating from here than from here. And even more energy operating from here than compared to here. And that difference you can actually feel and perceive. It's not that you have to wait till the end to say, okay, finally it worked, pa. No, it is working day and day. Not just day by day, but every moment by moment it is working. Every next moment it is working. Exactly.